Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Muslim Vibe in collaboration with Psychology of Spirituality. Saeed over here at ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America Conference. Very excited for it to be here back in Houston for the second year in a row. And we're even more elated to have Rabbi Marisa James over here. She's a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical, did I pronounce that?
Reconstructionist Rabbinical College.
Rabbinical College, and the Director of Social Justice Programming at the Beit you could probably help me out with that.
Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, CBST.
Simchat Torah in New York.
In Manhattan.
In Manhattan. So awesome to have another New Yorker here in Texas.
Woo.
We can spend the rest of the conversation just talking about New York, but we're going to save you guys the trouble, and we're going to really get into some interesting areas of interfaith, intersectionality, and spirituality. But first, I would love for you, Marisa James, to explain to our viewers a bit about the Reconstructionist rabbinical Jewish tradition.
Uh-huh.
How do you explore your own spirituality? Maybe even touch on your relationship with God, if that isn't too personal.
Sure.
Just to explain to our viewers what that means.
Absolutely. So I'm a Reconstructionist rabbi. Many people have not heard of Reconstructionist. It's the smallest American denomination of Jewry.
Okay.
We're relatively new. We've only been around for about 80 years. But the rabbi who founded our movement he saw that Jews were fighting with each other over who was most authentic and who really understood the tradition best. And, Orthodox and the Reform were fighting over who was really...
We see that in everything.
Sounds a little familiar, right? Yeah. And so he sort of came up with this philosophy of Judaism as a civilization. And he said, well, what if we look at, instead of as a single religion that there's only one way to get right, what if we say, well, in a civilization, there's multiple ways of doing things, and that enriches us rather than, being a source of argument. And so basically Reconstructionist Jews believe that there are many ways of being Jewish. There are many ways of being good at being Jewish.
Okay.
I will say one of my funnier experiences as a rabbi is that when I tell people I'm a religious leader, no matter what their religious background is, the first thing they'll say to me is, oh, I'm a really bad Christian, I'm a really bad Muslim, I'm a really bad Jew. The minute I say that, exactly, and I keep saying to them, no, I actually think you're probably a great Muslim, a great Jew, a great Christian, in the way that is right for you. And that's what Reconstructionism really believes, is that there are these different paths. And the synagogue where I work in New York City, Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, is an unusual synagogue in that we're not affiliated with a particular stream of Judaism. We actually have religious leaders who come from different backgrounds, which is not very common, but it is a really wonderful thing. It makes us deeper and richer. And working every day with people who come from different backgrounds than I do means that I learn a lot, that my beliefs and my values are challenged by other people who have slightly different ways of looking at things. And so it sort of strengthens me in my attempts to live a good life and to be a decent person and to try not to cause harm to anybody else. And I think it also makes me better at interacting with people from other religions when I'm having also deep conversations about difference with people from my own religion, because they're parallel conversations.
I would love for you to explore some of the intra-faith connections that exist within the Jewish diaspora here in America or abroad or whatever, because that's an area that us Muslims don't really get to explore, and lots of the work that I do personally is the intra-faith work within the Muslim community, because there are lots of segregations within the Sunni Shia branches, and then within the Shia branches we have like 12, 13 different branches. So I would love for you to tell our viewers a little bit about the Orthodox branch, the Reformist branch, and how does that look in modern contemporary America?
It's so interesting that you asked that, because my first time at ISNA, I felt so privileged to be listening in on those intra-faith conversations here among Muslims that I had never been exposed to before, and I had no idea that there were so many different sects and directions. And so Judaism is very much the same. I mean, there's and it's so funny, it's such a tiny, tiny community, and yet there's vast numbers of differences. So kind of broadly, Orthodox Jews are the ones who are the most visible, right? It's usually like Orthodox Jewish men and Muslim women who are wearing the interesting headgear that make us most visible. I'm unusual in being a woman who wears a kippah. But so Orthodox Jews are the ones who are the most visible. They're the ones who you will see wearing, if you go to certain parts of Brooklyn, wearing the black coats and black pants, and the women are covered down to their...
They speak Yiddish, yeah.
Some of them speak Yiddish, some of them don't, right? Different communities, and some of them speak different dialects of Yiddish, and then they fight with each other. And to the outside eye, they look exactly the same.
Very interesting.
But they're very different in their practice, their language, their customs. It's very interesting. And so they totally see themselves as carrying on a tradition in a way that's very strict, that is trying to adhere to the letter of the law, but not just the letter of the law, but there's a principle called building a fence around the Torah, that, okay, if we have the law that seems to say one thing, but you want to be so careful that you're doing what God wants of you that you do just a little bit more than that. So you're building a fence around that law. But then after like 2 generations, people are doing this thing that's a little bit bigger, and then they build a fence around that and they make it a little more strict. And so over the generations, things have become so strict that it's far from that original law. Reform Judaism began in Germany over 200 years ago by Jews who were saying, well, why can't we live as Jews in the world and go back to a more flexible understanding of how these laws work and whether we really have to follow every one of them in a very strict way. And then later, in early 20th century America, there was a movement called conservative Judaism, which was created to try to kind of find a middle ground of people who were trying to obey the law, but in a way that in every generation was being expanded and understood in the context of the things that we learn in the modern world about interfaith relations, about women's rights, about LGBTQ rights, about all the different things that our traditions 2,000 years ago weren't actually writing down on the page. Or if they were, we have not been trained to read it in that way. And so my branch of Judaism, Reconstructionism, was created by this Rabbi, Mordechai Kaplan, who saw that discussion back and forth, the argument back and forth between Orthodoxy and Reform and Conservative, and said, how about if I create a philosophy that will help us stop arguing and start appreciating each other?
Move forward, yeah.
And unfortunately, community politics being community politics, rather than being a philosophy that united everybody, it turned into yet another movement. And so it has its own school and its own synagogues, its own congregations and communities. But the philosophy is still very much about trying to appreciate the full range of expression of religion, and trying to understand what we learn every day in the world outside of our religious communities can exist with and enhance the way that we are living as religious people.
Thank you for giving us a succinct, overview of such a large, dynamic, socio-political, geopolitical, historical, religious issue
Sure.
in the Jewish tradition.